on my Backyard Professor blog, and I'll say it here in this podcast. The creeds were not produced by revelation from God. Now, I've read some Christian articles and scholarly material that say it is a revelation, but we've got the history, so far as we're aware at this point, based on the materials we have. This is not right. Those creeds were hammered out through philosophical discourse. They were forced to be accepted upon the Christians by a pagan emperor, Constantine. He's the one that called the bishops together. The reason why is because he had recently become the new emperor of the Roman Empire. Now, that would excite anybody, wouldn't it? I mean, talk about power. This man had probably the most power in the world in his day. And then what's he find in his empire? These cockeyed Christians squabbling so much about doctrines that even Constantine, when he wrote both to Athanasius and Arius, I have this in these books, he wrote and said, I cannot believe that you two are fighting about such unimportant, trivial, nay, even stupid matters. Knock it off. Stop it right now. You are going to come together and you are going to agree with each other, because I don't want my empire being divided and having internecine war. He was so mad at him, he was spitting fire at him. This is in the historical record, folks. Well, Bart Ehrman, with the Orthodox corruption of Scripture, the effect of the early Christological controversies on the text of the New Testament. When I first read this, it's 1993, Oxford University Press, astonishing text, really, seriously knocked me out. When I read it, I was completely astonished at what Bart Ehrman was saying. Let me read just a couple of highlights from Ehrman. Then I'm going to go to a gentleman named White, and then I'm going to go to Jeffrey Boots. I want to discuss this principle, this idea that most of us take for granted. We assume this is the actual reality, the nature of the situation. We assume, well, it's been this same way throughout all of history concerning this idea of orthodoxy and heresy. And there's a very interesting catch with all of this. Bart Ehrman brings it out very, very well. He says, my proposition in writing this book is I wanted to read about the words of the emerging New Testament and how they came to be changed by scribes of the early Christian centuries. Now, this scripture, this sola scriptura, this idea of Scripture alone, God-breathed, the Scripture is God-breathed. As we have the Bible, it was produced to us, it was given to us, it was produced by God, and of course, it's perfect. It's infallible. It's from God, of course. How can anything coming from God be anything less than perfect? And yet Bart Ehrman says, the scribes themselves changed the words. Scribes occasionally altered the words of their sacred texts. Why would they do such a thing? Bart Ehrman tells us the reason. They wanted to make their sacred texts more patently orthodox and to prevent their misuse by Christians who espoused aberrant views. Did you get that? This is stunning. We've always assumed, yes, the happy days of Jesus and the apostles walking calmly through the shores of the Sea of Galilee and presenting their wonderful discourses, and everything was nice and peaceful and loving and harmonious and all that. Not a bit of it. Don't kid yourselves. Christians have never agreed on their doctrines. From day one, the apostles could not comprehend what Jesus was teaching them. That's obvious by reading the New Testament itself. It never got better. It only got worse. Ehrman has proposed that in the process of the various controversies that arose in Christianity from the very beginning, these controversies caused different outlooks on Jesus Christ. Now, today's Christians would not be opposed to calling some of the early followers of Jesus just a few decades after Jesus' crucifixion, they wouldn't be opposed to calling them non-Christians based on their modern-day criteria today. So Mormons shouldn't feel so bad, because the whole argument is utterly spurious. It's ridiculous beyond belief. And I'm here to tell you why, because the history of the situation does not support the modern Christian argument that if you don't believe in Jesus the way we do, you can't have the same Jesus. That's ludicrous. For instance, Bart Ehrman, now this is in his introduction, he says, it was within the early Christian milieu of controversy that scribes sometimes changed their scriptural texts to make them say what they were already known to mean. In the technical parlance of textual criticism, which I retain for its significant ironies, these scribes corrupted their texts for theological reasons. Now, this goes against the grain of a lot of Christians who are arguing on the internet right now that there's changes. I mean, textual criticism has absolutely demonstrated, and the Christians can't run from this one anymore, that there are variations. But they don't affect any of the doctrines, we're told now. There's no real main significant difference in the doctrines. It's just a little jot here or a little tittle there. Not a bit of it. Bart Ehrman has destroyed that tissue of fantasizing. Very powerfully so. Proto-Orthodox scribes of the 2nd and 3rd centuries modified their texts of Scripture to make them conform more closely with their own Christological beliefs, affecting thereby the Orthodox corruption of Scripture. That is to say, from the time they got the original materials from the various Gospels or the various letters of whoever was writing letters, we know there's hundreds of letters being written back then, of course, and we know that there were a lot more than just 4 Gospels. 80, I believe, is what Christopher Stendhal is, or not Christopher Stendhal. I can't think of him right now. Anyway, there were a whole lot more than 4 Gospels. Only 4 made it in. This isn't because those were the ones that had the complete truth either. It was because those were the ones who belonged to the group of Christians who won the wars against the heretics. Now, this is uniquely fascinating about this concept of Orthodox versus heresy. From Jesus to Christianity, this book by L. Michael White, Harper, San Francisco. It's a fairly recent book. I'm trying to find the date. 2004. He notes on page 436 and 437, that's what I'm going to be utilizing in White's book. He has some interesting things to say about this idea. C.F. Bauer, in the 1800s, had a phenomenal literary career. He produced thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of written pages of scholarly analysis onto the Scriptures. And though his thesis is no longer accepted, in its original form, that is, one of Bauer's problems with discussing this idea of orthodoxy versus heresy, and that there really was no Christian unity from very early on, and so on and so forth, they were always fighting among themselves,